Hi there, this is Trevor Wilkins with a reference video about completing the ABC Analysis Workbook. This video is intended to be in addition to and not a replacement for the 10 steps to buying drivers sheet. That sheet has one extra thing that we're not going to cover in this video. It has a cross-reference to all the parts of the book describing in detail with examples each of the steps. But this is meant to be a resource to help you get going. The key to any ABC analysis is to have a really good set of features and functions for your product or your offering or your idea. And we start on the ABC analysis with a very traditional list. We put it down the left-hand side. If there's a lot of them and you need to group them together, then use the right-hand column to maybe reduce the number that you've got here down to a sensible number, and there's some notes down the middle. If you get this right, then everything falls out quite nicely. Now what you're then going to use is, because it gets quite messy, is you're going to use the generator sheet. And you're probably familiar with this already. The generator sheet takes each individual feature that you put on your workbook, and you put the first one into the box here on the top left hand corner, and then using your skills you use the so what analysis down the middle. You go so what, so what, so what, so what. Now some people prefer to put each of the so whats depending upon their style. Some of them just like to keep the flow on and do it verbally and put the odd note. But the key thing is you get to the point in the so whats where you found a takeaway. And you're going to put that takeaway in the right hand column of this generator sheet. Once you've got the takeaway, then enrich it. And there's plenty in the book about this. The first thing to do is say, so what else? I've got a time improvement here. Is there an income improvement? Is there any way in which the risk is reduced? And if you've got a specific takeaway, is it a compound? Does the reduction in time actually improve the risk? And does the improvement in risk reduce your expense, etc.? So this is where the real creativity comes on. And if you've got very strong buying drivers on this side, then you're going to have a strong ROI and you're going to have a very, very buyable offering. Once you've done the first feature or function and you've been through this process and you've got a strong takeaway, then in the next box down, repeat the process. And then keep going down that list of features and functions that you've got on your workbook until you've got all of the takeaways generated. Then, from that very messy sheet, and I tell you, that will become a messy sheet, you can then go to the second sheet of the ABC analysis and start putting a nice, neat set of takeaways down this left-hand column. Now, next to the left-hand column in the center is really the key to what it's all about. Here is the value narratives. And the value narratives is where you tell your story of how the buyer can get from that particular feature to the T.I.R.E.S. that really is the buying driver. It might be very simple. As a result of buying this, your costs will go down. Or it might be a much more complex discussion where you just explain to them exactly how they'll get there. But these value narratives are very important. There's also a cross-reference column here for source functions, which some people find useful, and there's a T.I.R.E.S section, which when things get quite complex is useful. Now this second page is a very, very powerful basis from which to move forward with many other things, like product development, like working with partners, doing marketing, advertising, collateral, case studies and things like that. So this is a pretty good place to get to, and we're still only on page 2. But for me, as a salesperson, it's page 3 that's very exciting. Page 3 is where we take the takeaways on page 2 and we put them into a sales navigation quadrant. The purpose of this is to help us to navigate the conversation with the potential buyer. If there are potentially, let's say, 6 things that you can supply in terms of takeaways to your buyer, they will be on this sheet. And this sheet will help you to navigate the conversation around those 6 items. As you get to each potential takeaway, you discover, do they need it? And if they do need it, can you expand it? Can you make it deeper, wider? And once you've got to the point they clearly do need it and it would have some value to them, find out what its worth would be. And we'll talk about that, how you do that a little bit later. And then you move on to the next. You navigate to the next takeaway until you've used all of them on the sheet. And the nature of the conversation will be different depending upon whether it's business or personal, or whether it's towards or away from. Now this sheet is generally a separate sheet. I personally keep one in my day book, and when I go and have a sales call, I have a quick look at it before I go in and I use my mind. but in the early days you might find it easier to have it as a separate document. Now that pretty much finishes the first half of the ABC analysis, and we call it the takeaway analysis because we're focusing on the takeaway parts. The second part of the analysis is called the commit analysis, and that's really where the fourth page comes in. And the fourth page is the key to making the sales conversation stick. At the top are 3 types of questions. This is where you can prepare the questions that will allow you to navigate the conversation to each of the potential takeaways that you can deliver. Now, I always say to everybody, they should start each sales conversation by saying their version of, do you mind if before I start, I ask a few questions to make best use of your time? Because there's an awful lot I could cover and I want to make quite sure that it's all relevant to you. Now, those are the words I use. You need to say something similar, but in a way that's happy with you. So I want you, the first thing to do is for you to put that opening question. Do you mind if before I start, I ask you a few questions? You will always get the answer yes, because you've given them a good takeaways that you're not going to waste their time. Then the second thing I want you to put in that top box is your opening question. It could be very simple opening question. So tell me about your business. Or it could be, you called me in to look at your report writing problems. Could you explain to me today how it works? Remember, don't ask them about their problems. We want a nice chunked up question. Tell me how it works. So this is your opening question. Now from that point on, you've got to navigate to each of those takeaways. And this is where the second box comes in. Some people are very happy and confident with challenges and chunking, and they can do it off the top of their head. Personally, I like to have a few prepared questions, particularly if there's a part of their business that you know you can help, but it's going to be difficult to get the conversation there. So that's where the second part comes. That's the navigation questions. Now you've navigated, you've got to a takeaway, you've discovered that they do need it, and you've worked out how much they need it. That's where the third question comes in. These are the valuation questions. Once you're there, you can sometimes ask the blunt question. So what would that be worth to you? Generally, you have to circle in on that by saying, so how do you measure the outputs from that and the success of those outputs? And can you put a value figure on those outputs? Okay, so and what are you looking to improve those outputs for? And begin to get some numbers that you can create as so that will probably be worth X to you. So these are important points to do some preparation. Personally, I find evaluation questions hardest to do, and I prepare for the most. You may find them the easiest, and you may find the navigation questions are the ones you need to prepare. That's why I've split them into the 3. And of course, once you've done one set of takeaways and you've been to each of them, you're ready to say that wonderful example, assuming there's business to be done. Go and read the book about what to do if there's no business. But if there is business to be done, you can then say, well, that's great, that's exactly what we do. And now let me tell you how we do it. And at that point, you've got this box here, the delivery narratives. I love delivery narratives. This allows you to pitch to them how wonderful the journey will be from how things are today to what they will be like and how they will get those takeaways and those tires at the end of the project. And it's a very good time to get somebody really to be a willing buyer. Now the challenge is that often they will lean forward and say, well, that sounds great, but you would say that, wouldn't you? You're just a salesman. So that's where the convincers comes in. Everybody has different ways of being convinced. Sometimes they're personal convincers, sometimes they may be corporate systems for ensuring that convincers are filled. But this is where you need to put your list of convincers. And depending upon how well the conversation's gone, you may say, okay, I think you would probably prefer some visual convincers. So let me give you a diagram of how this works. Or maybe you can give them a URL for a video. Or if they're a person who likes to go and speak to somebody outside of themselves, you can arrange for a telephone call. All this stuff goes here. This is proof that what you're saying here is true. That's pretty much the end of the ABC analysis, because that gives you enough tools to get to the point where you've got a willing buyer, some proof they've got some financial driver for the things they want to buy, and you can then move forward from there. From there you have to create a buying plan, and that's a subject of a separate reference video. But what we've got here is enough information to go and engage with the client. Now, what you'll see after this is a very short video showing that process I've just described for those of you who have a preferred representation of graphical, and it just takes you through the whole process visually. I hope that's been useful.